Alright, on to the fun stuff. Time to map the controls. DCS can be played on a mouse and keyboard, however, it's not recommended. Unlike other games that utilize a mouse and keyboard effectively to the point that it may be preferred over a traditional joystick and throttle, like, I don't know, let's say War Thunder, DCS is simply not like that at all. Your experience would be infinitely better with something like an Xbox controller. So if you do have one laying around, then I would suggest using that over just a mouse and keyboard. For mapping your controls on a controller, I have in the description a link by our friend Tuvas, who has created guides on how to bind your stuff per module for a controller. So check that out. But if you do have a joystick and throttle, or you're just going to be using a mouse and keyboard, but would like to know what buttons you need to use, then follow along and get a piece of paper with a pen, because it's easier to jot some of this stuff down and reference it later on. If you're in the market for an entry-level joystick and throttle, then I have a coupon code for 15% off in the description below for the Thrustmaster T-Flight HOTAS 1. It's a decent start and definitely vastly superior to playing with just a mouse and keyboard. Okay, let's move on to controls, finally. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do the controls for the mouse and keyboard users first, and then we're going to talk about the joystick users. So the first thing you're going to be greeted is probably something like this. So the first thing we want to do is switch this over to the SU25T. There we go. All right, so from here on out, I want you to have a piece of paper and a pen ready for you guys because you're going to have a lot of stuff to write down, okay? So go ahead and make sure you jot these down. So right off the bat, we have these 4 different modes. Go ahead and write these down. This is the keyboard press that you would press to do these things. And don't worry, this is something we're going to go over as the lessons progress, but just so you know where they are. Next, air brakes. Air brakes are pretty important. You can turn them on and off as a toggle with B or on and off individually with these keybinds. For you guys, probably the best bet is just to press B. Next, to actually control the aircraft, we have the aircraft bank left and right arrows on the keyboard, as well as pitch up and pitch down. Over here, up and down. You have your rudders left and right as well. If you are going to be using autopilot, that's A on the keyboard. I also like to use either the H for barometric hold or one of these two as well. And then you have autopilot disengage. And again, this is something we'll go over in the future, but this is how you turn autopilot on and off. If you ever want to shoot your guns, you're actually going to need to switch over to the cannon, that's C on the keyboard. And if you ever want to switch between moving your mouse as view, if you don't have VR or you don't have head tracking, you're going to want to use your mouse to actually look around. Remember, the SU25T is a non-clickable cockpit because it's part of the Flaming Cliffs 3 package. Any plane in the Flaming Cliffs 3 package is non-clickable. There is a clickable mod available, but we're not going to go there right now. Communications menu is something we're going to need to use. So that's backslash on the keyboard. And again, I'll show you how to use all that in the future. Countermeasures, something we'll go over. That'll be its own lesson. But if you want to do either chaff or flares per button per press, it's that. Or if you want to save yourself some time and you just want to release both chaff and flare at the same time per button, that is Q. And again, don't worry, we'll go over this. Although it's not always necessary, sometimes you want to pop a parachute when you land on the aircraft on the ground to slow it down really quickly. That is P on the keyboard. So just note that down. And then we have ECM. This is your jammer. Again, something we'll go over in a future lesson, but that's E on the keyboard. If you want to eject, that's left control and E. Press that 3 times, 1, 2, 3, and you'll eject the pilot. To turn the ELINT pod on or off, again, we'll go over the ELINT pod in the future. That is I on the keyboard. The electric power switch, this is something we'll use for the startup. That's right shift and L. You got to know that one. The electrical optical system, again, something we'll go over in the future, but that is O on the keyboard. Engine start. Instead of doing individual left, right, start, stop, you can just use these two. Engine start, engine stop. It will start and stop both your left and right engines. That's right shift home, right shift end. Flaps. Flaps are pretty important. You're going to need to have a few of these bound. So flaps landing position for sure. That's left shift plus F. And then the flaps up for left control plus F, and the flaps up or down, that will just be F. Make sure you write all 3 of these down. If you're flying at night and you like to have some gear lights, this is where you do that. Right Alt plus L. IR jamming is part of one of those things that we're going to turn on and forget about it, but again, I will go over this in a future lesson. That is left shift plus E. Landing gear, to move it up or down, you have these individual buttons, or I would just press G on the keyboard. It toggles it either up or down, so pretty easy. Laser Ranger, on or off. You're going to be flipping this one on or off for particular weapons, so make sure you write this down. Right shift plus O. And we have this, the radar display zoom in, display zoom out. You don't have a radar, but you do have display zooms. You're going to be clicking this on or off a lot, so that's minus and equal sign. When you start your jet up for the first time, you're going to hear a lot of different noises going on in the background, which are going to be pretty annoying. That's your radar warning receiver, or the SPO for this aircraft. If you want to turn that volume down so it's not as annoying, this is how you do that here. Volume down and up. Don't worry about mode select. The target designator is how you're going to move your targeting pod around, your lint pod and stuff. Now, don't worry about that for now, but do write this down so you know how to control it. Up, down, left, right, okay? Next up, we obviously need to know how to lock stuff up, and that is enter, target lock. And by the same account, we want to know how to unlock something, that's target unlock, backspace. The throttles, this is how you control your thrust for your left and right engine. I only use really this on the keyboard if I have to, up and down, all right? You don't really need to have these other ones here. Trim, you're gonna hate this, but you're gonna need to use this a lot. So we have the trim hat, and it snows down up, left, and right. Unfortunately, you gotta have this there. You're gonna be touching this a lot, so jot these down, please. However, you can ignore the trim rudder for left and right. You're probably never going to touch that. Now, in order to actually look around, as I said before, you can use your mouse to look around, right? With the left control plus C, I believe. Or there is an alternative, and that is your number keypads. So you have 4, 8, 6, 2 to look around, and then 5 in order to actually center your view. So that's all of these keys over here, okay? But I just use the number keypads. It will make sense once you play around with it. Now, in order to actually change your weapon types, let's say I have different types of air-to-ground weapons when I'm in air-to-ground mode, this is how I do that with weapon change. That's D on the keyboard. And then to actually fire weapons, well, that's spacebar on the keyboard. And we press and hold the spacebar in order to fire or release weapons. Then we have weapon jettison. That's left control plus W. You are going to probably need to write that down. And wheel brakes. And we want to stop the aircraft while it's underground. That is W on the keyboard. Now, in order to actually zoom your view in and out, because sometimes it's difficult to see certain things, that is this button right here. Zoom in slow, zoom out slow. That is the number star button, multiplication, whatever you want to call it, and the / on the number keypad again. These two. And that's it for mouse and keyboard. You're done. All right, now that we get the mouse and keyboard users out of the way, it's time for the joystick and throttle users. So the first thing that you're going to notice is if I go here, and I'll explain this in a second, there's a little problem. If you have plugged in your joystick and throttle, you're going to have what are called double binds. You see how I have a column for my joystick, my rudder pedals, and my throttle, and my mouse over here? Notice how I have different things bound to the same exact thing here. This is what we call a double bind. This is bad, and we want to get rid of this. So what I would highly encourage you, because DCS will automatically bind stuff for you in the access commands and the all but access commands. It's going to be wrong. It's going to be all wrong. It's going to be terrible. What I highly recommend is you just highlight the column by clicking anywhere in the joystick section, clear category, press yes. Get rid of it all. Get rid of the rudder pedals. Get rid of your throttle. Blank it all out. We're going to start from scratch. Do the same thing for the access commands. Highlight joystick, rudder, throttle, blank, clear it all. Okay? Clear, clear, clear. We're starting from a blank slate. All right? And that's going to get rid of double binds, and it's going to get rid of all the incorrect button bindings. Okay, so let's go back to the all but access commands. The difference between this and the other is that the all but access commands is for buttons, presses, switches, that sort of thing. While the access commands is for everything that's an axis, whether it's that your pitch, your rudder, your throttles, that is all an axis. So we're actually going to start off with the all but access commands. Now, if you would like to know where I bound all of my stuff, here's a picture of everything that I have outlined for my HOTAS. Now we've cleared everything, so we're going to be looking at a blank slate, but here is how I've bound some stuff. And I'm going to have the keyboard section here, so you can see what the keyboard commands are in case you do not have the space on your joystick and throttle. And you would like to have this at least jotted down on a piece of paper. I highly encourage that you have a piece of paper and pen and you write some of this stuff down that you cannot fit on your joystick and throttle. Anything that's really super important, I'll let you know that it's really important to put this on a HOTAS. Everything else, write it down, see what the keyboard command is, so you have that at least somewhere to reference for later, okay? Okay, so the first thing is how to switch between the navigation, the air-to-air, air-to-ground modes. This is how you do that. So go ahead and map this if you can, otherwise jot it down. Air brakes on or off, or the air brake toggle. If you don't have the space, just a single button. That's how you do that right there. Autopilot. Autopilot is something we'll go over in the future. It's something you can probably get away with leaving on the keyboard for now. You turn autopilot on with A, you turn it off with left alt +9, and then you have different types of autopilots here. I mainly use this one, the altitude and roll hold, and the attitude hold. Again, I will explain autopilot in the future, but this is how you should probably have this bound. Cannon. If you want to actually fire your cannons, your guns, well, you first need to switch over to the cannons. That's C on the keyboard, so I have a little switch for that, so I can quickly switch the guns at any point. I would say that's pretty important to put on your HOTAS. The communications menu, you can probably leave that on the keyboard. This is \, and I'll explain how to interact with ATC and ground crew and all that in a future lesson, but that's how you enter the communications menu. Countermeasures is going to be a future lesson, so I'll explain what all these things are. If you have the space, I would put chaff and flare separate, so per press you'll deploy either flares or chaff. Then we have countermeasure release, and that will dispense both chaff and flare per press of the button. ECM, this is your jammer. This is something you're probably just going to turn on and then leave on. So you can probably leave this on the keyboard, that's E. The lint pod is something we'll go over in a future lesson, so don't worry about it too much, but we do want to know how to turn it on or off. That's I in the keyboard. Then you also have the electrical optical system. Same thing, we'll explain this in the future, that's O. Again, not too necessary to have on your HOTAS. However, in order to actually turn the aircraft on, you're going to need to know how to turn the electrical power switch, and that's right shift +L. This is not something you need to bind to your HOTAS, but have this written down so you know how to start the plane. And then in regards to actually starting the engines, well, don't bother with the left, right, and all that. Instead, just have the engine start, engine stop written down somewhere at least. You don't have to bind this. This is something you'll do only once when you get into the aircraft, so at least write it down. Flaps. Flaps are a little bit weird. The reason is that you have 3 positions for flaps. The clean or up position, the medium or down position, and then the full landing position. So if I press the landing position flaps, it goes all the way down to the full flaps. This is the landing configuration. Now, if I go and press the flaps up, it's not going to stop at the middle position. It's going to bypass that and just go directly into the clean configuration. So if I press F, then it's going to go into the middle position for takeoff. The gear lights, something you don't really need to have bound. That's right, Alt +L. And this will shine light in front of your nose gear so you can see where you are during the nighttime. IR jamming, this is your infrared jammer. Again, this is something you're going to turn on and forget about, so just write this down somewhere. Left shift +E. Don't really need to have this bound if you don't have the space. The laser ranger is something that you're actually going to use because it is necessary for certain types of weapons. I would encourage you to please have this on your joystick or throttle somewhere. That's right shift +O. The navigational lights are the exterior lights for your aircraft for nighttime or low visibility. That's right control +L. Not highly necessary to put on your HOTAS. The night vision flare or LLTV, again, this is something I'll explain in the future. Very rarely used, but it's something you definitely should have written down. It's something we'll cover in a future lesson. Display zoom in, display zoom out. You don't actually have a radar in the SU-25T, but you will be zooming in, zooming out on your sensors, like your camera or something like that. I highly encourage you to actually put this on your HOTAS if you can. That's equals or a minus sign on the keyboard. There's going to be a really annoying sound that you're going to hear when you first start up your jet. This is your radar warning receiver, or RWR. It's called the SPO in the SU-25T. You're going to want to turn the volume down so it doesn't drive you insane. So in order to turn the volume down or up, that's these 2 buttons. Do not put this on your joystick unless you want to. I would just have this written down somewhere. The target designator. This is how you move the camera up, down, left, right in order to target stuff with it. If you do have something called a slew sensor on your throttle, or maybe it's on your joystick, I would highly recommend that you leave this alone. We'll put this in the axis section. If you do not have anything like that, then this is how you're going to move it around. Down, left, right, up. And I would bind these. And then to actually lock or unlock something, this is how you do that. Enter or backspace, but definitely have this on your HOTAS if you can, please. The trim is unfortunately something you're going to be using a lot, so highly recommend that you put this on your HOTAS if you can, please. Otherwise, write these down. However, you can ignore the trim rudder left and right. Weapon change. If you have different types of weapons, let's say I have different types of air-to-ground weapons and I want to switch between them, you do that with the D key, but obviously I would encourage you to have this on your HOTAS so it's nice, quick, and easy to switch between your different weapons. And then to actually fire them, well, that's spacebar. Obviously set this to your trigger and it's press and hold to fire because that's definitely going to come up in the future. So definitely bind this. Obviously bind this. Weapon jettison, you're going to want to jettison your weapons really quickly. That is left control plus W. Have this somewhere if you have the space. Otherwise, just know it's left control and W to jettison your weapons. And then to actually zoom your camera in and zoom your camera out, this is zoom in slow, zoom out slow. I highly recommend that you write this down so you can zoom in and out with your head. All right, so we are now done with the all but axis commands. All the switches and buttons should be done. Let's move on over to the axis commands. So we have 3 sections to worry about here. Let's start off with joystick. Joystick is just simply your pitch and your roll. So you're gonna double click, you're gonna move your stick back and forth, and you're gonna set this up. And if I move now my joystick up and down, you'll notice that is bound correctly. Do the same thing for your roll. Double click, push it left and right, and it should bind it automatically. Now push it left and right, and yep, that looks just about right. Perfect. All right, cool. Now the next thing we want to do is set a curvature for both my pitch and roll. So what I'm going to do is highlight this. I'm going to go to axis tune, and you're going to notice that I set a curvature of 25. I recommend anywhere between 20 and 30 for a curvature. And it just makes it so that in the center, everything's nice and smooth. While when you go to the extremes, you retain full authority of your axis, okay? So it'll just make for a smoother ride, is all that is. As far as your dead zone is concerned, only put a dead zone if the red box doesn't go back to the exact center when you move stuff around. So if you notice, it doesn't go back quite to the center. It's a little bit off to the side. This is the center position, but it doesn't always go back there. So I have a tiny little dead zone of just 1, okay? Don't get crazy with the dead zones. And also make sure to do the same thing for your roll. Set the same thing, axis tune, and set a curvature there. Moving on to the rudders, well, the rudder pedals are set to rudder over here. And I also have a axis tune and put a curvature. I like a higher curve here, so I'll put 30. And I generally don't need a dead zone. I'll put 1. Why not? And that's it. And that's done. I'm going to move it around. Yep, that looks perfectly fine. Cool. Now let's move on over to the throttles. So there are 2 main things here. Obviously thrust or throttles, right? There is thrust, and this is for people who only have a single lever. So you don't have split throttles, left and right. You just have 1 lever, you bind it to thrust, move the throttle up and down, bind it there, you're done. If you do have split throttles, I would suggest moving the left one for thrust left, then binding the right one for thrust right. No curvatures are needed. Lastly, we have this thing. Remember when I told you the target designator back here? This thing over here to move the cameras up, down, left, right? Well, if you do have a slew sensor on your throttle or your joystick, this is what it is. That's the horizontal for left and right, so bind that, and then vertical for up and down. I also did a really funky little thing with the axis tune here. I actually made it a little bit less sensitive because it was going all over the place. Experiment with my settings here and see if that works for you, okay? And then do the same thing for Joy Y, axis tune. Note, however, I had to invert this one. You may not, but check it out. For me, up and down was actually down and up. So clicking invert, inverted that, okay? Now, if you have a Thrustmaster Warthog HOTAS, you see how on your throttle base you have a friction lever? I highly recommend that for your zoom view, you actually set this over here. So go to your throttle, double click it, and move that friction lever up and down. And then put an axis tune and set it as a slider, and then put a little bit of a curvature back. The further back you put this, the further back the camera will be when the lever is in a center position. And the further towards 0 it is, the more it will be the default view. I don't like the default view. It's too zoomed in for me. So I like it at least -14, 15, something like that. And that zooms things out for me a little bit. If you don't have a Thrustmaster Warthog HOTAS, don't worry about it. Okay, and that's it. We have done our controls for the joystick and the throttle. Cool, huh? However, I would highly recommend that you do one last step. Let's go back to the all but axis commands. I want you to save your profiles. A lot of stuff can happen. You may need to reinstall DCS, you may need to reinstall Windows, whatever happens. If you have to go through this again, it's gonna be a pain in the butt, right? So what if you save it to a different drive? I highly recommend you do that. The way you do this is with everything now done and bound, go ahead and highlight the joystick column. You can just click anywhere so it's highlighted. Now go to Save Profile As, and then navigate to where you would like to save it. I have it saved to another drive, the G drive, and I have a folder for my joystick settings. You'll notice that it's empty, but if you change this to all files, you'll notice that I have a ton of profiles for different things. The way I would save this is we currently have the joystick section selected. I would name this the SU25T joystick and then write down what throttle what joystick you're using. Is it your Virpil, Wing, is it Thrustmaster, whatever. So SU25T joystick, Thrustmaster, Warthog, Kotas. I would save it as that. Click OK, and then do the same thing for your throttle. Highlight anywhere in the throttle section, save profile as, and then save it SU25T throttle, Thrustmaster, Warthog, Kotas. Press OK, you're done. All right. And in the future, if you ever need to load the profiles, first, make sure that you highlight each category, clear the categories to clear everything that's there by default for your joystick, your rudders, and your throttle, and then load the profile. Select the joystick section column, load profile, switch this to this, find the SU25T joystick, make sure it's the joystick, right? Click OK, it'll load everything there that you have bound. Do the same thing for your throttle. That's it, just the joystick and the throttle. You don't need anything else, you don't need the access commands, nothing. Just the joystick and throttle, everything should be bound for you. Just when you're done, press OK to make sure everything saves, go back, and just make sure that everything in the access commands is correct. Sometimes some things happen. Double check. If you have to rebind some stuff, you rebind it. It takes you, what, 2 minutes? There's literally no options here. And you're done, okay? We're done here, guys. That's it for this episode. I'm sorry I took up so much of your time. There was a lot to talk about. But next lesson, we are going to be going over how to start the aircraft, how to take off, and some of its quirks in flying. All right, I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.